Great. So I wanted to start the presentation today with this quote, which is a famous quote from Henry Ford, which some of you might have said or seen, that says, if I'd asked people what they wanted, who said fast horses. Now, why I'm starting with this, I think this is quite an interesting really reflection on education, really, and that it's hard for people to conceptualize what the art of the possible is unless they're really shown it. And then when, of course, they are shown it, they can appreciate what it's going to give. And I think this is important because there's many parallels between this and what we're really seeing with digital twins out in the market. But unless we are able to articulate it clearly and really explain what they can do and the power of them, then it's very hard for industry at large to understand that. So, as just introduced there, my name is Simon Evans and I work for Arup, where I look after digital within our energy sectors. I'm kindly setting the context of this session, standing for our Chief Data Officer, Volker Buscher, who's unfortunately unwell today. But really the frame of this is to hopefully set the scene around digital twins and data ontologies and a bit of our perspective of what we're doing here in Arup. So if you'll let me take the liberty to go a bit into the context of twins and ontologies before then obviously a bit more about what we're doing. It's really hard not to get excited by this concept when you hear statistics such as this one from a report this year, where it said the global digital twin market was valued at 3 billion or so in 2020 and expected to reach nearly 50 billion by 2026, or a statistic from a few years ago now that said that half of all large companies will be using one, whatever one is, by next year, apparently resulting in a 10% improvement of effectiveness. So these two statistics are interesting for various reasons, however you might attribute value and how the analysts might have determined where this 50 billion comes from. What it shows is that there's a massive trend when it comes to digital twins coming in industry, and what that really means for us is something that is important for events like this to really look at. So if you'll, again, just let me take the liberty of explaining a bit around what the twin is, because I appreciate many in this audience will be very familiar, but also many in this audience will not be. In its basic concept, and I'm borrowing some graphics very kindly here from CDBB, we have a physical or a real asset, and then we have some type of digital representation of that asset. Now that digital representation we know is developed to a level of detail proportionate to what you're trying to achieve, which means it could be a fully dimensional 3D model with all this metadata attached, or it could simply be a 2D map system or process, again, depending on the use case you're trying to answer. So it's not necessarily just a 3D model, for example. Then what we know is that there's data that flows from the physical to the digital through some type of pipeline. And this data we typically see as write time, not necessarily real time. Because in right time meaning that it's the right frequency, again, depending on what you're trying to do, rather than just having everything at the highest frequency possible, allowing us, when we have this information, this data in our digital state, to surface insights, derive insights, and from it make decisions, but most importantly, then allowing ourselves to make interventions back into the physical or the real, where the outcomes are delivered. Now, this connection, physical to digital, digital to physical, is what makes a twin, as we know, rather than just a model or simulation, and something that we know has existed for a long time, but has just become more apparent because of storage, compute, and connectivity. Now, in that context as well, what we really know is that twins, as I said, aren't a new invention at all. There's something that we have seen, and some of the earliest examples of these connected twins was around the Apollo 13 missions 50 years ago, where the concept at the time was called digital mirroring, which helped, of course, them bring the astronauts home safe. And since then, for the last 20 years or so, we've seen the manufacturing sector heavily take on the concept of digital twinning. And then the last 5 years or so, the energy business, which is mine, and then 18 months particularly, it's been very, very prevalent in the built environment. Now, the other misconception that we see all the time, and this is slightly related to the topic of the day, is that digital twins are here to replace BIM, which we also know is fundamentally not true, because information modeling or the data models associated with it are really fundamental in achieving aspirations of what these digital twins can achieve. I know that's more built environment framed, but it's something I think it's important to put out there, which why in the context of what we're looking at Arup, we really consider it a bit more appropriate to really refer to what we're seeing in this area as a digital twin approach. And approach being a bit more of the pivotal word, because it refers to this as an idea of it being a methodology and not a technology or product. That we know there isn't one product out there that you can buy and deliver a twin. That's a ludicrous notion. It's really the way of working and using data through the life cycle that underpins everything, and how that can provide benefit and value to what we're doing. Now, with that in mind, the other part we also know, and this is now flipping slightly to the ontology side, is that when you're on the journey of creating digital twins, a lot of the focus is on the unicorn at the end of the journey of this fully autonomous assets, state of assets that can control itself and do all this great stuff. And few really focus on the benefits and value along the route of getting to that, ultimately acknowledging that developing these twins or these connected twins is a journey and not a destination. But within that as well, we often forget the road that allows us to get there, the pathway itself. Now, flipping that to the perspective of data and what that looks like, if we consider a bit of an arbitrary spectrum here from the point of my analogy of data going from visibility to interoperability, visibility, of course, being the surfacing of information, making it apparent to the organization or multiple organizations, and interoperability being the exchange of information between parties. We know that most organizations are in this space where, given they might have come from an analog era, it's all about trying to find and surface the data they've got. But in reality, what we're trying to do and what we need to do as industry and society as a whole is move along this spectrum towards interoperability and the ability of how we can connect this great concept or this great unicorn, to however you want to perceive it, to each other into this argument of an ecosystem of connected twins, which naturally, as we know, will rely on ontologies. And without that, it will be fundamentally impossible to achieve, which of course means that connecting all these things together, we can get this benefits that we have here talked about very readily in the National Digital Twin Program and otherwise, where we can in essence create connected digital twins for our entire society, allowing this physical digital state to exist at that aggregated level rather than at a single asset level. Ultimately, again, allowing us to take a much more systems-based view of not only the built environment, but every single environment and every single sector that we work in, delivering outcomes across that spectrum for economy, environment, etc. Now, in the context of Arup, we're of course looking at this really carefully and trying to understand where we can contribute ourselves, especially on the backdrop of the UN Sustainability Development Goals, for example, the Golden Thread, the Hackett Report, the National Digital Twin Program, and other wider agendas. So last year, we obviously produced our Digital Twin Report, which we titled Towards a Meaningful Framework. And the reason for that is it was really recognition that we and industry are not really there yet, but we're on our way towards it. And it's the importance of those constellations of collaborators along the route and how we can work together on it. Now, we've also got our view on creativity with data at scale, which for us is really our strategy on data and what that means for us as an organization, and how it really looking at how we internally and for our clients can set ourselves up to find those data ecosystems, our research, for example, our future business models, and ultimately how we can tackle the cost and friction of data in the built environment. But of course, we realize we're not alone in this, which is why the phrase that really resonates with us that we hear a lot around this space is collaborate on the rules and compete on the game. That us as Arup, naturally, we have an agenda that we want to have this ecosystem and this functioning landscape internally. And we're doing a lot of work, particularly around this creativity with data at scale and some other research agendas that my colleague Ben is heavily involved in leading around our data supernova program. But it's about collaborating wider than that, because just like us and any other consultant out there who have their various data models, their understandings, their plans, it's really when we bring those together and collaborate on those rules and then naturally compete on the game based on individual USPs that we really see the power. Now, that for us takes us nicely to the topic of the day here, where we're talking about digital twins and data ontologies. And the importance for that for us is that, yes, absolutely, every organization is going to have their own agendas and their own drivers, but it's beyond that. It's about how we can come together and have a common shared vision of that interoperable layer, those ontologies that connect our twins together, and what that ultimately can mean for public good and the benefits of society that gets us as an organization really excited. Now, I'll hand back to the organisers now, but I think hopefully that's a good frame setting, a bit of an introduction to digital twins in general. And I think some of the outcomes we're going to hear today from CWE, DAFNI, and our speakers of the different sectors is really some great thinking and some really some pivotal work in how we can start moving towards that meaningful future together. So thank you again, and apologies I had to do a stand-in rather than you hearing from Volker, but hopefully that gives us a bit of a frame for the start of the day.